We are joined today by Johnathan Lee Iverson, who was the last ringmaster for the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. I am honored to have him on my podcast today. And I guess where I want to start is, how did you get into the whole circus industry?
You know, it was a happy accident. I'm a trained opera singer. I was at the University of Hartford, Hart School of Music, long before you were born, young man. And I graduated there, and the objective was to actually go off to Europe to continue my studies. That's what I was going to do. And that been the goal since I was 13 years old. And I saw Placido Domingo on a trip with the Boys Choir of Harlem in Japan. And I just thought, okay, that's it. That's who I'm going to be. And I was really out and about, auditioning here and there, attempting to raise some kind of funds so I could make the trip to Europe and study with a particular teacher I had met. We were going to, just crash and just work and study. Opera is an interesting beast because your body has to do certain things no matter how talented you are. That's why I hate those reality voice competitions with the 12-year-old belting out Verdi. And I'm like, somebody ought to be beat because that's not natural and it's not okay. But anyway, that's what I was going to do. And I happened into this audition for a dinner theater out there in wonderful Wisconsin. And it's Fireside Dinner Theater. And I was going to, I auditioned for that. I got that role, but unbeknownst to me, the director of the dinner theater was also directing Ringling Brothers, and he was looking for a ringmaster for their latest show, and he threw the opportunity my way for an audition. It was an audition in which I was up against about 30 other candidates. It was very rigorous. They didn't just roll out the red carpet. I had to go for it, and I did. I had about 3 different auditions, if I can remember. And the rest is history.
Can I ask about those auditions? Because I don't think people realize that you don't just get in the circus. I'm sure there's recruiters, but what did they have you do? Because ringmasters, you do it all. You're walking around, you're dancing, you're interacting with the audience, the act. So how do they have you audition when you have to do almost everything?
Well, it was one of those things where first I happened to fit a particular type. And that's what I'll say to anybody who's listening to this, who's going to venture into show business of any kind as an entertainer. You have to understand, especially if you're in theater or circus or film, television, type is priority over talent. Sometimes you get freaks of nature whose talent is just so overwhelming, they'll just create the thing around them. But generally, it's type first. I've been in auditions plenty of times where, I've had casting directors stop me and say, listen, you're the perfect voice for this, but you're a bit too tall. And that's the proper thing because casting is its own science. So when I went in for the audition for the dinner theater, which was an ensemble type of, because it was supposed to be for their Christmas show. So it was an ensemble thing, and it's a big deal out there in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. I happened to kind of fit the mold. And when I sang at that time, and I was really, operating on all cylinders, I was just singing a lot. Even when I graduated, I went to a wonderful, prestigious young artist program during the summer. So my chops were up. And so when I went to do this audition, I have to say I knocked their socks off, and they told me so. And suddenly it was like this director was like, okay, I think you might be right for this. And that's another thing that often happens in this business. And people will tell you that over and over again. They may have auditioned for one thing, and then like later on, maybe years later, they hear about, oh, you fit for this. So I say that to say to those out there who are on those long audition lines, who are now sending in virtual auditions, what have you, there's not a plot against you. Believe me, every casting director wants you to be the one. It would make their job so much easier if you're the one. It's just the nature of the business. You know, I mean, it's not just about talent, it's type, but I say keep going until you become the type or until you create something that's yours, you know, a la Matt Damon and Ben Affleck with Goodwill Hunting. You know, they wrote their own break. Maybe you can do that. But in this case, I obviously fit what they were looking for. And that was the first entry in. My first official audition for Ringling Brothers was a taped audition. It was semi-live and tape. I was performing for the director, but they recorded me for the producer. So I did that. I did about 2 songs, and then I said, okay, I was in Wisconsin during the show, and it was told to me that it's a possibility that I would have to break the contract in Wisconsin if I got the Ringling Brothers gig. And they were like, look, I mean, that happens all the time in this business. I mean, you know, I mean, because you have to go for what works. And it wasn't really on me. I mean, you know, it was like the gig was going to go until after December. We were talking about an opportunity that was going to be at least 2 years long with the greatest show on earth. I mean, you know, you would have to be utterly cruel to make me have to, you know, honor that whole thing. But eventually, you know, funny thing is I left Ringling Brothers for a little bit. And during the time I was away, I ended up going back to the dinner theater and performing there. And so I finished out my whole contract. It was the same show and everything. So we always had a big laugh about that. But anyway, when I was there the first time, my final audition was for the late, great Tim Holst, who was the vice president of talent and production. So this man had the most enviable job, I think, in show business, because he got to travel all over the world constantly, casting the talent for the Ringling Brothers shows. So he was a very, very important man in circus, period. Everybody knew him. Everybody wanted his card, wanted him to see their act. You know what I'm saying? So he came into Wisconsin. I auditioned for him. And moments later, I was awarded the role. And, you know, it was great. You know, after that, he and I would venture off to Chicago, where he took me to see the Blue Unit's presentation of The Greatest Show on Earth. And that featured the legendary Jim Ragona, who was there, but he happened not to be there that night, which was weird because Jim Ragona was like a freaking stallion. He was like a horse. He never missed a show. But I think there was something, he had something he just couldn't miss. And I saw David Kaiser, who stepped in for him. But, you know, it was a thrilling experience. And nonetheless, it was their way of letting me get a taste of what it was going to be about. And then I went off to preside over the red unit of The Greatest Show on Earth.
What is the differentiating between the red and the blue unit, in case people don't understand?
Just the color, really. You know, we had our little battles among each other, you know, saying whose show was better. But honestly, both shows were thrilling. Both shows were extraordinary. Both shows were equally as expensive. Both shows had mile-long circus trains. Both traveled really the same route, but at different times. So let's say in November of, let's say, the first year for the red, we would be in Chicago. Mm-hmm. That would probably be the second year for the blue, and they would be, I would say, maybe Michigan, something like that. You know, our schedules would just basically crisscross. And so, you know, where it gave the American public a fresh new show every year. So that's how we thought of it.
So with these rotating shows and things, are you guys going city to city, like as the Red You, or are you in one city for like a couple of weeks and then new one for a couple of weeks? Or the
Yeah, you know, it always depended on the actual city. You know, like let's say Chicagoland was always a big deal. So we would play when I was there. So we would play Rosemont for about a week or even 2 weeks. We would play Rosemont, and then we would move on to the United Center, and we would play Chicago for about 2 weeks. So we would be there for about a good month, maybe. Like say like Madison Square Garden. Now in the good old days, we played Madison Square Garden for like 3 months.
Wow.
From what I was told, I never had that kind of run, but during my time, the most we played, I remember, was about 3 weeks, and then it came down to about two. But we would pack in like 27 shows or something in a 2 week period. So, yeah.
A day. So like logistically, I'd like to know a little bit more about the logistics since it is an industry. I don't think people understand. This is not just like a fun day. It's a very much, it's very planned, very coordinated. So what goes into the production of a circus or the traveling, like some of those aspects that you think people don't really know a lot about?
I really thank you for that question, because it's the answer I'm going to give you is why I tell people you have to be aware that you don't compare circus with chaos. Circus moves like a well-oiled machine. In fact, it was Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey who taught the US military logistics
Really?
of packing trains. They actually came to Ringling Brothers to learn that. So, the circus, it may look like this chaotic thing when you're watching the show. It's really not. It's just the three rings. That's why people get, it's just so much. And we often would debate that during my time there, whether we should cut them down. And some, we experimented with different things because of the public's attention span. However, the logistics of it, I mean, you would never, ever know any show like it, because you're building from the ground up. And you're creating a theme, and you're creating, some kind of something that's likely never been done before. You have to cast your acts accordingly. There's the manpower behind it is unprecedented. You have to have riggers who know what they're doing. You have to have great set designers and, of course, costume designers. I mean, everything is top of the line. You have to have great musicians. We have live music. What we did in Ringling Brothers, I can't speak for other shows. I know other shows did, some didn't, some would go on tracks. Ringling Brothers we were renowned for our musical legacy. In fact, when they recruited me, they made it clear to me they wanted a singing ringmaster, which was a tradition I believe Ringling Brothers really spearheaded. I don't know if we were the originators, but we really spearheaded it with a gentleman by the name of Harold Ronk, who I had the pleasure of meeting my first year in Chicago, by the way. He was the original singing ringmaster, and he was incredible. And I had the pleasure of meeting him during my first year of my career. With the Ringling Brothers show, I mean, you also have to think about there's also the animal performers. There's also living quarters, which was usually the mile-long circus train.
How does that work logistically, like living on a train, if you want to talk about that as well?
Oh yeah, that's it's like any neighborhood, being a ringmaster for me, I always joked with my colleagues that I lived in a high rent district. I lived in the private cars where the managers were. I had a wonderful setup. My first time when I was a bachelor, I had a quarter car. It was great. I had a bedroom, a kitchenette with a living room space, a bathroom, shower, the whole bit. When I got married and I brought my children on the road with me, it expanded to half a car. So I had 2 bedrooms, bunk beds for my children, a master bedroom for myself and my wife. We had a full out bathroom with an actual bathtub, because my daughter was an infant when we came onto the road. So we had a bathtub, the whole bit, had the living room and kitchenette, and it was great. It's the best way to see the country. So, the logistics of maintaining that, we had of course we had a train crew, we had a transportation crew. These were the folks responsible for transferring equipment from the train to the venue and vice versa. We had a food services, the world famous pie car. We had a pie car on the train, and we had a pie car junior at the venue. We also, of course, you have stables. You need to house the animals. And usually how a run would work is, let's say those who were building the stables, those who were the animal caretakers, they would go ahead of the train, of course, the riggers as well. So you had a lot of folks who lived in trailers and who did truck and trailers. So they would go and they would generally make it to the venue before we did, set up the framework, the rigging, the animal stables, the bedding, all that stuff. And then basically when we got there, we just basically filled it.
So that, I mean, that's a whole process. You have all these moving parts that have to like collide perfectly, or not collide, but they have to like work together perfectly.
Absolutely. Lighting, sound, video. I mean, the more advanced technology got, I mean, I really learned to appreciate what they were putting into it. It's an expensive endeavor.
What would happen if something went wrong along the way? Like, or if like, since with technology is bound to break. So how would you handle it? I'm assuming you guys everything was live. You weren't using like in-ear monitors or anything. So if something went down, how did you guys handle it? Since it's usually, I'm assuming it's planned. So, like this has to happen, then this. So if something falls, then what would take its place?
Well, I mean, one thing I always said is you never have a boring day at the greatest show on earth. Something always happened. Generally, it was some kind of nothing kind of mishap. Maybe an act was a little late getting on, or maybe there's some glitch with setting up the equipment for another act or something. Those were generally the issues that would happen. And so let's say I would have to stretch a line a little more, let's say with, one of our great tiger and lion trainers was presenting, and I could see out of the corner of my eye, the cats weren't set like when the light would come up. And so I would stretch his announcement out to buy him that time so he can set, because, the circus is a living thing. So everything has a personality, even the lights and the dust, so it's, there was always, we were prepared for things going wrong. And when I say you're prepared for it is, you don't know, you just have to have a mind that is supple enough to not get stuck. And I don't know how things came out of me. I don't know how I improv. It just happened. You just let yourself go. There are times, a performer might, be sleeping in between shows and like, be enjoying sleep a bit too much, and the show started, and like the cue, there's a connection with me and that person, and they're not there. I had to fill that time, come up with something. I mean, it's just all sorts of things happen, and things out of our control. Usually it's out of your control. I mean, because the care and the know-how that goes into putting that show together is second to none. But life happens. And some things are worse than others. I mean, we famously had a really terrible accident back in 2014, where we had these beautiful hair hangers. It was such an innovative act. It was 8 hair hangers at once. I don't think it ever been done before. It was called the Human Chandelier. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful act. We'd seen it in rehearsals and well over 100 and some odd performances. And then that one Sunday, the apparatus just, collapsed. And, it was a really traumatic incident. But, the show must go on. And so we figured a way around that. Of course, it hit home deeply, because one of the things you understand is you have a unique situation when you're dealing with circus. It's not just a cast. They do become your family, de facto family, for the time you're traveling. You're not just performing with people and going back to a hotel. You're going back to your neighborhood, which is the train. So you live with each other, you barbecue, you fight, you play, you date, you all this stuff. So we have deep connections. So what affects one affects us all. And inevitably it affects the entire circus world.
Interesting. You were talking about cues. Now, how does the cues work logistically? Because there are probably 300 people, I'm sure, be like each, like between the crew and the acts. How did that work?
Believe it or not, it isn't. When I first started, right? So I came from traditional performing, so to speak, quote unquote, where, you had a backstage manager, 5 and 5. So my first dress rehearsal ever, I'm sitting in my dressing room, ready, dressed up. And all of a sudden I just hear the music going. And I'm like, oh, nobody gave me my 5. And I realized in this culture, you have to be on it yourself. You have to really know. You have to be aware of the time, which in many respects, that was great. Our production team, again, great production team. My wife would actually ascend to being the production manager of the show. So she bossed me around all day long. And uh, the person in that position would give a lot of the cues, but mainly to the lights, sound, video, things like that. Performers basically knew when and where, unless there was something, let's say, we knew, hey, we have an issue backstage, stretch it out. That's when I would get some, or I could feel something wasn't right. And we were always in communication. I would use an in-ear, mainly because of the echo
Right.
in a large arena. And it kept me connected with the band. It kept me in time with the band. So there wouldn't be that delay. You often hear that when people sing the national anthem at sporting events, you usually hear this delay. But if they're wise, they'll have an in-ear or something to, keep them from slowing it down because they're trying to keep up with the echo. So that we do have those devices, and it would play a dual role, not only me keeping time, but sometimes the band leader or the production manager would cue in and say, hey, we have a mishap, or hey, can you move this along here, or hey, we're going to cut this out. But communication was generally really good on the performance end, because usually I would know what was going on before the show. But even if something just happened to go off, one of my good skill sets was that I could think on my feet. And having the band was the same way. They were very fluid. The clowns, very fluid. So it was always good to have you have a collection of performers and artists and personnel that just knew how to move and really purport themselves in the event that instant change would occur.
That's hard. That's hard to do. So I want to talk about like instant change. What was a day like? Did things change? Like a typical day, like on the road, or a performance night. Since you guys do like 3 week stints, what was your typical day like?
You're adorable, man. There's no typical day in the circus. It's just, you just get up and hope for the best. And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but I mean, it made our existence there very fresh. Um, there just wasn't a typical day. I mean, it's just I would say the typical week was we opened on a Wednesday and played through Sunday. And typical day, let's say Saturday was typical. It was a 3-show day. So you just kind of zone out and you just knock those out. But yeah, again, it's a living, breathing thing. So you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we've had all sorts of just things happen when we got up. I remember for years, we performed through everything. And one time, a couple of times, there was like snowstorms that were so violent, we had to cancel a show. We had to cancel a run, or, we've had members of our cast or crew pass away or something. And I mean, of course, we go on with the show, but, it's just life is always happening, kind of what's going on now. People are realizing, change will happen with or without you, and so you have to have the guts and the fluidity enough to kind of move along with it. And so that's what circus is in that respect. We're always, shifting and changing whatever. What is consistent is our, or at least every individual's commitment to excellence. You committed to really putting forth a really great and amazing production, because as we find out more and more, even though the show's been closed for almost 4 years, it means so much to people. It meant so much to people, and everybody has their own Ringling Brothers story, and I think that's wonderful.
Right. So speaking of a close, you guys closed a couple of years ago. What was that final show like? You have to tell me. Were there a lot of emotions in the room? Was everyone kind of nostalgic that this is it?
Yeah, I mean, we had about 4 months to prepare for it, but you're never really ready. It was a very emotional show, a lot of tears. Um, Quite frankly, I was numb because I had to be. So I was proud of myself because as ringmaster, you have to be stoic in many respects. You just have to be because if you break, everybody else does. So you take a certain burden and you just deal with it. But I didn't really reflect on it until maybe a month or so later. And then I let my system, my body just rest, and I let my spirit just start exhaling it. And it took a good 2 years, honestly, to really just kind of be like, okay, I'm over that. I'm moved on. Not like I'm over that, I could care, but it was like, I don't, it's not there where it's like, oh, I wish I could go back. People ask me that all the time. And honestly, I wouldn't. I wouldn't, I've done it. I been there, done that, and I had a great time. I got a family out of it. Met a lot of wonderful people, and I've made my mark. If it ever were to come back again, I hope um, they would bring on new, fresh, wonderful talent. And there's a lot of wonderful talent out there, a lot of young, wonderful talent and diverse talent. I hope it's more diverse. I hope they do maintain their relationship with animals in the show because I think that's very important. I think it's very important for the existence of different species because, listen, out of sight, out of mind. And I think so many of us learned about the animal world because of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. We learned about what those animals truly can do and what they're about by just seeing them, being around them, being able to touch them.
And I was that was my next thing is I wanted to talk about the animals because there is a perception with circuses and animals. So how did that work? Like the animals. I mean, working with animals, they're live. They're not like humans where they're on point. They're animals. They do what they want. So did that create logistical challenges for a circus where you have to transport them from the train and the venue, and now when they're on stage, you hope they do what they want? Does that create challenges for either the ringmaster or the trainers?
No, if I'm going back to one of your earlier questions, I will say that um, the most predictable uh, uh, things that occurred were the animals' behavior. The animals were the best thing there. It was the two-legged mammals you had to watch out for. Um, all you have to do is feed them and praise them and pay attention, and really want to do that. Every animal trainer I know who was worth their salt, that's really what their inclination was about. They really believe because it's not a glamorous life. Like I don't know any rich animal trainers. Maybe they're out there, and there are people who make a really good living. But even if they do, you can give an animal trainer $1 billion. The reality is, it's still ugly work. Like you have to be constantly on the grind. You have to be constantly aware. Animal trainers, they're not able to take vacations because the animals, they require your attention. They require your consistent presence. And in many respects, you require it. As the great Alexander Lacey, wonderful animal trainer, great lion and tiger. He had this beautiful lion and tiger act. And he told me, man, I mean, he was like, he gets up crack of dawn. He told me once, and I didn't notice. He said you would notice, but not all. He said all of my lions and tigers, they don't all always go out. Sometimes I have to leave a few back because I can see, they're just not in the space mentally or emotionally to do the show that day. And so what am I going to do? I mean, you're gonna fight with a 600-pound tiger? I mean, people come up with these mythologies, and listen, it's not like there isn't some truth to it. Of course, in every industry, you have your riffraffs and degenerates, including non-for-profit animal rights industries. Speaking of which, you know, what validated our claims as Ringling Brothers is we actually won a major case against the ASPCA and the Humane Society of the United States. Collectively, they had to pay us over $25 million in a RICO suit. You know, RICO, you know who gets RICO? The mafia. And they had to pay us in a RICO suit. And it had to do with a 14-year-old court ordeal they put us through, which the presiding judge, I believe his name was Emmett Sullivan, flat out said this should have never came to trial. It was vexatious, it was groundless, it was frivolous. That's what the judge said. And the public doesn't hear that because it's not sexy. It's not sexy to hear that, you know, the pillars of animal training is patience, praise, you know, and rewards. You know, I mean, that's all. That's what it is. And it takes a lot of work. I've seen animal trainers train before. I used to sit in. I would, because that was one of my things as ringmaster. I would sit through acts and I would watch them practice. And it gives you a different respect. Animal training was the worst for me because I don't have the patience. I will admit, I would have been an abusive animal trainer because I don't have that patience. I would have been a horrible person. But that's not my gift. That's not for me. But I would watch, and I watch trainers go over and over. I'm like, how in the world? That's crazy. But then you see, oh man, this is what they do. This is their thing. And, you know, I guess somebody could have said the same thing with me. You know, I'm going over scales and things and certain things to get myself ready that other people looking, why are you doing it? You know, but we all have to have a little ugly in the thing we love to make it beautiful. You know, I mean, you as great juggler, friend of mine, Paris, the hip hop juggler, he told me, he said, you're in juggling, so you have to embrace the ugly. You have to embrace that repetition, that you know, that thing, you know, where it's constant, it's a grind, you don't want to do it. I don't care who it is, man. You go back to any of the great artists, anybody who's done anything worthwhile, whether it's great artists, whether it's great engineers, whoever, they have something where they have that ugly place they go to dig out the beauty that they want to produce. And so that was a great lesson. That's a great lesson I learned watching our great animal trainers. I mean, it takes a lot, and you have to be willing to put in that kind of work to, you know, produce that gem.
Now, how many animal trainers were there? So like when there's a guy on stage, is that, or a girl on stage, is that the only trainer, or do they work with other trainers as well? Like,
no, you know, that's an awesome question. You know, some trainers were more presentational than they were actual trainers. So there would be somebody who would actually train animals, and then the presenter would come in and become more familiar. They had a sense with animals, but, you know, you had some people who that's how the relationship was. You know, it's like you have a songwriter and then you have the person who will sing it. Then you had trainers like an Alexander Lacey or like a Gunther Gable Williams, you know, who actually, they trained their animals and they could present them in an incredible way. You have people like that as well. The staff is multifaceted. Of course, you have your actual trainer and or presenter, and you have your staff of handlers and grooms and things like that. And it's multifaceted, and everybody has to become obviously familiar with their assigned animals. Usually what I observed was that, let's say so-and-so had a great horse act, they would probably be the owners of the horses, and they would have their own kind of crew there where they'd have their own assistants with them who would be on the show too, because they're familiar with their bevy of horses. Now, the show itself would have its own kind of grooms and handlers for the animals it owned, you know, and in that way, the animals were familiar with those particular people. What I'm telling you is, you know, it's as all the trainers had once told me, you start with a shovel in your hand, you know, you start because you have to earn the trust of that animal. And it's again, the glamour of that is maybe 5% of what you, most of what they're doing is feeding, training, making sure they're not fighting, babysitting. You're babysitting for 95% of your career, your day really as an animal trainer. You're babysitting. That 5% of performing, that's the easy part. You know, it's all the other stuff in preparation to that and getting up to that. That's the grind, man.
Now, speaking of grind, were there any acts that required more preparation or more production that were more difficult to do live than others?
Of course, you know, everything. There was always acts that required more preparation than others. My very first year, we had a guy. What he would do, he'd climb up this ladder about 30 or 40 feet, and he'd light himself on fire, and he'd just come down into this airbag. And, you know, people were thrilled with it. Now, the preparation for that was a bit, because I roomed with the guy. And at a certain time during the show, because he only really did two things. He would drive the float in the opening act, in the opening parade, and in the spectacle parade. That was the parade that we throw right before intermission. So somewhere midway, no, actually, like somewhere at the top of the second half. And this was always consistent, clockwork. He'd have his fluids, he'd have his suit, everything was steps. It was the same steps for 500 shows a year, the same exact steps. Same thing with another roommate of mine, dressing roommate of mine, the great Mark David, who was a single trapeze artist. Amazing. This guy looked like a Ken doll in the air. I never looked on a man like and been in awe in my life. But consistency. He would ready himself. He would be at the venue at a certain time, check his rigging, consult with the crew, be in the dressing room. He'd have his little snack, which were these, goodness, it was like these peanut butter cookies he liked. That was it. Like, he stayed at a certain weight and he was strong as a bull. But he didn't look it. He looked nothing like it. You wouldn't know it. But because, I mean, it takes a lot of core strength, grip strength to climb up that kind of rig. And but it was consistent. It was just consistent. And he wouldn't miss a show. He didn't miss one show. Just constantly, you know, and I mean, and that's the thing with, you know, let's say with Alexander Lacey's Lion and Tiger act, it was what he did from 6 a.m. up until showtime that made the difference, you know? So, I mean, the acts, I always say you don't play circus, you know, you are, you know, and acts are practicing even after the show, generally, especially flying trapeze, they're always practicing, always.
So I asked my people on social media questions I should ask you, and the most common question was clown cars. Are you allowed to tell us how did? And I want to talk about clowns too, because there's a fear that people have, but that's later. I was just curious, like, how do they work? How do some of these gimmicks work?
Even I don't know. I really don't know. I would love, and if I did know, I probably wouldn't say anything because they'd kill me. But I don't know how that worked. I always thought it was a mystery to me, and I never even bothered to ask because they wouldn't tell me. But I have no idea how they do it. I'm sure everybody was pretty flexible, and hopefully nobody was claustrophobic. But that's probably, it's pretty interesting, yeah.
Now, like with clowns, like there's many people are afraid of clowns. So how did the circus work against that? A lot of, and kids too. That's a big audience. Is like little kids like circus. How did the circus against that? You know, fear that people are afraid of clowns.
You know, I mean, it's nothing we can do about it. You know, everybody has their thing. You know, the circus, listen, I like to believe the circus is good for everybody, but, you know, I mean, everything isn't for everybody. There's really nothing you can do about it, you know. Some clowns could overcome it depending on the audience. And others just, you know, they always were respectful. The ones I knew were respectful of people's hesitations or their fears or whatever. And you have to be, because you're serving the audience.
Now, are you allowed to interact with the audience? Like, are they allowed if they want? Do they have like a leeway as to what they can and can't do when it comes to interacting?
Oh no, of course. I mean, well, I think the audience had common sense, and I'm glad they did. But we always had a pre-show
Okay.
that we would have for that purpose. So we would meet our audience. They come onto the arena floor, and there would be some acts here and there, just some pre-show acts, and there would be performers lined up around the arena floor at different stations, wardrobe stations, face painting stations, things like that, who would interact with the audience. And they got to meet all of these people from around the world. So yeah, we always met our audience, and that was the funnest part. And of course, as ringmaster, I would go into the audience all the time. I'd play with people. I'd, go in and I'd sit next to people and I'd talk to them, and, I'd mess with somebody who, if they were on the phone, like, here you are with, like, you're the greatest show on earth, and you have the audacity to be on a phone call. Like, what are you talking about? So I'd have a lot of fun with the audience.
Do you have any like story that just like stands out to you, like one that you'll always remember, whether it's like interaction with the
Oh
audience?
my goodness, yeah. So like, I have a Rolodex of stories, but one in particular that I really I'm really fond of is we were in Jacksonville, Florida, and it appeared the whole front row was just so giddy, and this one family in particular, and it was this lovely mother she had sparkly hair. She put on a sparkly hair wig and hat, and painted her face. And one son was dressed like a ringmaster, the other was dressed as a clown, and they were having too much fun. I mean, in a good way. Like, everything was so exciting. And I'm like, okay, I got to meet these people, because this is just ridiculous. These people are having I got to at least go over there and say hi. And I got over there, barely reached them, and they suffocated me with hugs. And the mother was like, she said, I know we're having a ball here, but I got to tell you, this show means so much to us. You see my son over here, the one like the ringmaster, well, he's autistic. I mean, how would I know? Nobody would know, really, because he seems to be having the ball like every other kid. But she said it wasn't until he was 4 years old that he said his first word, and he said it at a Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey show. So she said, that's why we come here. We have to be here. And so when we did close, I mean, those were the types of people I thought about, who the show really, really mattered to so much, which I had the privilege of really learning about again with the latest TikTok trend they had, the Greatest Showman Challenge. And I was pulled into that. My friend, I was like, I'm never getting TikTok. Leave me alone. He said, no, you got to go and you got to do it. So I just did a little video, and man, it was really a welcome surprise, where people really just, they said, oh man, how much they really loved the show, and how much it meant to them, and what it was like to, see me there. But, it mattered to me that it was a good feeling to hear so many people just speak so kindly of that time of their life, and what we brought to them, because that's what it's all about. If you're not peddling joy as a circus artist, you're not doing your job right.
Now, do you get recognized on the streets ever, or like out in public, or when you're in certain places?
Highly rare, highly rare. I mean, it's like a lunar eclipse or something. It's like highly rare somebody would actually know what I did, which I loved, because I was like, great, because I could have a life. I never wanted that kind of popularity. I think it's sort of a prison. I mean, and I wouldn't be cruel if I had it, but I wouldn't want that kind of popularity. I love the idea that I could be in those big glamorous costumes, do what I do, come out and just be me.
I like that. I like that. So speaking of well known, you've performed for a lot of really cool people, and I saw you perform for Nelson Mandela as one of them. Can you tell me a story of how that came to be and what that was like?
Yeah, I was in the Boys Choir of Harlem when I was a kid. The Boys Choir of Harlem was a world-renowned chorus, and based in New York City, New York. And I happened to join it at the age of 11, went through the hardest 18 months of my young life earning a spot in the performing choir, but I did, and it was really heavenly, and it really taught me the value of grinding and putting your heart into something and working hard until you get something done, and I did. And one of those treats was the fact that we would perform for dignitaries, heads of states. I've been fortunate enough to perform for over four American presidents. Been to the White House a couple of times. Had the best bacon and pancakes ever. It was at the White House. I'll never forget it. It was during George H.W. Bush's tenure. Thank you, sir. Rest in peace. And I met so many incredible, legendary individuals and artists. And of course, one of the highlights of my life was singing for the great Nelson Mandela when he had just been released from prison. And that was a huge thing. I mean, it was magical because we resigned him to the annals of history. We didn't think he'd ever get out.
Right.
So we talk about him a lot in school. The choir had an academy, so I was there all day. But he was a part of our history lessons. And so to see this history come to life and that he was out and, making his rounds and to be a part of that historical moment was really a tremendous thing for me in my young life at the time.
Were you able to personally interact with him, or was he just like an?
Oh no, he was a ways away. He was just, I remember he looked ethereal from the distance where we saw him. He's a tall man, he just looked, it just didn't feel real. I remember that's how it felt. It didn't feel real.
That's really cool though. So did that make you more nervous when you knew that there's something like a dignitary or somebody really well known watching you, that they're there? Did that happen?
No, we were really arrogant as kids. And thank goodness, I mean, sometimes that youthful arrogance comes into play. We worked so hard and that nerves weren't there anymore. Like we worked our nerves down to death. we were really that good because we worked. I mean, we worked, and we had great direction with Dr. Walter J. Turnbull, the late great Dr. Walter J. Turnbull, who founded the choir. And we just had a state-of-the-art staff. I mean, our staff was just world-class folks, musicians and people. And so we were very fortunate in that, so there was a level of, there was a standard you had to reach. And we all were, and there's something, and it was competitive in that sense. It was good competition. And mediocrity was frowned upon, and you just wanted to make sure you did what you did and you contributed well, and it was great to be a contributor to that. It really was. It felt great when you could show off what you've been putting so much work into. And I would say we never really realized how good we had it until we, let's say, performed with other youth organizations. And it was like, wow, I mean, it was like, man, we're just so much better.
I love that though. So I have a question, what are you up to now, right? Since you're retired from the circus and you're still very young, what are you up to nowadays?
I appreciate you saying that I'm still young. Thank you. And I am young. I'm doing a bit of everything. Right now, I am really happy to announce that I am a board member of Omnium, a bold new circus. I'm also a ringmaster with them. It's a wonderful new circus. You can see it at omniumcircus.org. Omniumcircus.org. It's a wonderful, wonderful new circus. We have a virtual show that's been extended until April 4th because of the demand. It's wonderful. It's really great.
How that works, like a virtual show? How do you?
Yeah, almost like we're doing now, but a little more high tech. So the acts basically pre-recorded their presentations, and myself and another performer, we did like our own interactions. We had a wonderful tech company that just really helped put it all together, and it works wonderfully. We have the show online, omniumcircus.org. It's really wonderful. I'm also doing voiceovers, and I do a lot of corporate hosting and things like that. And in the virtual space, I've been doing some work with Upstage Aid, NCPA, National Collegiate Performing Arts. It's, a wonderful contest of, these incredible collegiate talents from around the country, around the world. I've been a part of that as well. And, I have my own little day job too, to keep making ends meet. But, I also host the show. Oh, actually, you see it here. In Center Ring is a wonderful show I created during the pandemic. At the behest of people going, you need a podcast. You need some kind of show, man. Right now, I haven't transferred the files to a podcast, but you can see the episodes on my YouTube channel. You can see them on my Facebook page at Last Ringmaster. If you look that up, you can see all the episodes there. And it's really just a wonderful catalog of great interviews with some of the circus world's most interesting people. And I think you'd love it. I also I'm going to restart, there's demand for it. I started this wonderful program called Ringmaster Storytime, and people really loved it. And, but I needed to fix some technical glitches, but I have about 10 episodes of that if you want to enjoy it. That's on the page as well. It's a lot of fun.
So you tell your stories about your time as a ringmaster?
No, Ringmaster Storytimes, I actually read just classic stories, in costume. And sometimes I might invite a performer on, but it's just reading, bedtime stories, basically. And people took to it. They enjoyed it.
That's cool. Now, do you have like something like do you have like any long-term goals, like 30 years from now, like where you want to be, or you just want to continue kind of going?
No, I want to be what 50 Cent told us to do years ago: get rich or die trying.
I love that so much. That's
No, I mean, right now, I just want to, I have a day job that's allowed me to work remotely, and it's wonderful. And right now, I'm just focused on really getting more skilled with that, and of course continuing my work with Omnium and the other performing work that I do. I'm scheduled actually to perform with the Winter Park Playhouse this summer for a Gershwin review. I have to get in shape for that, but I'm scheduled to do that, so to be back on stage. My wife, interestingly enough, she started her own mask making business. Her and my mother, they started the business together during the pandemic, and it's been thriving. It's really wonderful. She makes these awesome masks. It's called Maple Tree Mask. Maple Tree Mask. Yeah, and I'm really proud of her. So everybody works from home. My children, they're doing remote schooling. I'm working from home. My wife is working from home. So we have quite the electric bill.
Oh, I can only imagine. Your internet must be hating you after all that you go online.
Yeah, they hate me at Spectrum.
Well, I wanted to personally thank you so much for telling these stories. And if you guys want to follow him, he's at the Last Ringmaster on pretty much every social media, right? Like TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And then his website is bigtopvoice.com, BIGTOPVOICE.com. And do you have anything you want to close with, or a quote or something you want to end with?
Listen, I want everybody to always remember this: keep the circus alive inside you.
Thank you so much, Johnathan, for being here.
Thank you, my friend.